Welcome to another episode of Stoke Meter, and today we have the CEO of the Kite program. This is Hannah Hardy-Jones. Hannah, how are you?
I'm really well, thank you. Yes, thanks for having me.
I love it. And as you can tell, Hannah is not across the street. She is more like across a couple oceans in New Zealand.
Right.
And I never checked on that. Are you in Auckland or Christchurch, or whereabouts are you?
I am in Christchurch, so in the South Island. So we're the city that had unfortunately, the awful earthquake. So we are 10 years on now. So things are looking much better in Christchurch than they were.
Good. That is very, very good. Well, and I'll tell you what, the way that we were introduced to Hannah is I was going through LinkedIn and I was so inspired by one of her posts that I happened to just ask if she would consider being on the show. And thankfully she saw one of the interviews and said yes. So thank you.
Yeah, no problem at all. Yeah, it's been how long ago was that post? I think about 3 weeks ago. And coming from somebody, I used LinkedIn, I had like 1,000 connections and it was a really close-knit thing, and I decided to do this post. And now it's had 2.2 million views, and my LinkedIn has just gone absolutely crazy. It's it's quite amazing. So I've had some awesome people reach out like yourself.
And well, it shows that it hit right where it needed to hit. We have how many discussions have we had, Gary, on mental health as of late?
Just about every single thing we do lately, there's an element of mental health that is part of the angle over and over again. It's crazy.
It really is. And it's only been multiplied by COVID and by the isolation that comes with that. And my goodness. And I have to say, I appreciate that you were in HR, because that was my 25-year career.
It's a hard role, isn't it? I think, especially COVID. My peers. I mean, I don't work in HR anymore, but my peers and my ex-colleagues have found it just so hard through COVID, because they're expected to be the ones to sort of carry it and to, roll out the initiatives and make the redundancies. And it's really, really rough.
It really is, especially when it comes to any of those furloughs or those hard conversations with employee relations and so on and so forth. And I can't imagine how it's grown as of the last couple of years. But again, this goes back to you were in HR, and the story that I understood and that really hooked me was you talking about, here you are in your HR career, and then you get pregnant, and it sounded like it was a pretty much a very great pregnancy. And then after that pregnancy, you had that postpartum depression. Is that about right?
Yeah, well, I actually had the opposite. So I had a manic episode. So it wasn't even something that was on our radar. When you are pregnant and you're learning in the classes that you do about what are the signs of postnatal depression, and we felt like we were all over that. We knew the signs. And so when I started having a manic episode, which is obviously the opposite, and you become higher and higher and higher, we just didn't know what was happening. Friends and family just thought I was just behaving really, oddly. And then obviously, became really, really unwell at that point. So I had a very unusual, I guess, journey into motherhood from that perspective.
How soon after your birth did that start to happen? Was that immediate, or did it take some time?
So I had a really, really traumatic birth, and straight away afterwards, everyone was sort of saying, you're going to need to recover. And I just remember sitting in the hospital bed, even sort of 10 hours after labor, feeling like I wanted to get up and do things, and I could go out to the shops, or like really heightened, so it was pretty, I mean, I think looking back, it was obvious to me that something was quite unusual to start with, but it was about 10 days after having Alice that, I guess behaviorally, it was just so obvious that this just wasn't, a lack of sleep or anything like that. So it was an interesting journey, to say the least.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So guide us through that. What happened after that? So
at about 10 days, I mean, I'd been doing all sorts of things like going to get my hair cut and going on big shopping sprees and, really unusual behavior for a brand new mother. And it was at the point where probably I'd had 4 days in a row of no sleep. So I was almost like kind of hiding it, like I'd be not sleeping, but I'd pretend that I was, so no one would pick up that, there was something going on. And then from that point, luckily for me, because I had a new baby, the support was there. If I had had a manic episode without a new baby, it's really difficult to get that mental health support. You kind of go on a waiting list, but because I had a brand new baby, you get a lot more, and I was able to be treated at home. So I had carers around the clock that were kind of just ensuring my safety, really. And I was in that, I kind of had that sort of stage for about 6 weeks, which is, if you ask my husband and friends, that was the longest 6 weeks, waiting, trying to work out, medication and, what was going on. And I was having the best time, because obviously when you're in that state, you're not exactly unhappy. And so from that point, after that six week period, things were starting to get under control, and we were sort of thinking, oh, that's over. And that's when we were told, actually, you can't have a manic episode on its own. This is bipolar. You have now got bipolar disorder, triggered by childbirth, but you'll have for the rest of your life. And unfortunately, you'll also need to wait for the depressive episodes, because they will come. You can't just have a high and not have the low. And so it was like a freight train, and for me, I was, my response was, I'm a happy person. This depression, this won't be happening to me. I can sort of almost like fend it off. And within about a week after that, it hit. And the only way I can describe it was going to bed one night thinking, oh gosh, I feel so grateful I'm well, and waking up in the morning like there was, somebody lying on me. Like it was so, it wasn't an easy, it didn't ease in. It was just bang, it was here. So that was really, much more difficult for me, I think, probably than everyone else. I think everyone else was really happy that the mania had gone.
Yes.
They could deal with the depression. It was almost like, oh, she seems still sort of like herself. Whereas for me, the depressive episodes were just horrific, Yeah.
You said in one of the interviews that the overwhelming nature of depression really came as a shock. And right. And you strike me as an incredibly happy, enthusiastic individual. And I want to turn this one over to Gary a little bit too, because I remember way back we were hanging out and I didn't see him for a little bit, right? And so and Gary, by now, I look at you and you could almost be doppelgangers as far as personality.
No, it really is such just a complex thing, especially when you're going through it. And I know just from my experience dealing with patients and that type of thing, is bipolar is so much more difficult than just straight depression or, feeling down. And when people are in it and they start to recognize, kind of what phase they're in, you kind of know what's coming next. And it's brutal, you know what I mean? And so, no, I feel for you. And then when you're in that depressive state, so much of it is just withdrawing and pulling away from at the time when you need the help the most. I don't know if you went through that. But.
Yeah, and I think probably having a little baby again, and I had carers, which was really helpful. You know, these amazing women would come in, and one of them was a Samoan lady, and she pretty much filled up the room, you know, physically and, you know, and her sort of spirit. And she'd just sort of, you know, almost cradle me, and she'd just stroke my hair. Like, that was how she took care of me, you know. And I was just in such a state of, you know, and it was actually the anxiety mixed with the depression. So I think I always had the perception that depression was just feeling really, really sad and hopeless. I didn't realize that it could also be coupled with just crippling anxiety about, like, how am I going to get through the next minute, the next hour? And yeah, it was definitely a fight. And I think that if I didn't have a little baby, it would have been very easy just to withdraw completely and not get out of my bed. But I had a reason to kind of put clothes on, you know, and just try and, you know, and I used to just lie next to her. She would be lying on the carpet, you know, on a mat on the carpet, and I wouldn't know what to do with her. I'd look at her and think, I literally have no idea even how to give love to this little baby. Like, I've got nothing. But I'd just lie next to her and just put my hand on her, and that's all I did. And it was just, you know, that was all I could do. But I sort of felt like, if she at least knows that there's this presence here, you know. And I was always so worried that, you know, down the track we wouldn't have a good relationship, that my bond with her had been broken forever. And, you know, and then you come out the other side and you realize that it is quite a small period of time and it's not too late.
Yes. I want to ask you a question. So I think this is interesting in the sense that the one thing that you talked about, a caregiver that had a big impact on you, was someone that just showed up and was physically present. And it almost seems to me like you were also projecting that same kind of what you needed on your child. You know what I mean? Like, you just put your hand on them and you were there. And that's kind of what you needed. And I just want to throw that in there as a quick aside almost for when people, you know, that you love or care about are going through these, you know, depression or bipolar, whatever it is. A lot of times, man, you just need someone to be, you know, everyone always like, well, what do I say? What do I do? You know, I say just show up.
Totally. Yeah, do you know that is so exactly the advice that I give to people too, is that almost like people feel like unless they're giving you a solution or they're, you know, they're talking or they're doing something, that they're not helping. And you're right, just if you can kind of fill the room with your sort of love and support, that is enough for them, you know. And that judgment, I think that was the other thing, is that this amazing woman, I just felt like there was no judgment whatsoever. And I don't know whether she'd dealt with anyone else with a mental health issue, like in her family or anything, but it was almost like that was just in her being. Maybe all her ancestors, that's what they used to do. It was just like, yeah, I'm here. Yeah.
Just listening to you two I remember working with friends that were going through some type of depression or some kind of bipolar disorder. And here I come in with this, come on, buck it up, Sludger, you can do this, get it done. That kind of stuff. I look back at that and I feel like an absolute idiot for doing that, because there are so many things that I did not know and still don't quite understand about mental health until the other day I was speaking with a representative from Pfizer, and he was one of the first individuals that sold Zoloft. And I told him what I did. I go, you know, that's what most people do. They say those things, but when you have a broken leg, do you go up and buck it up? You could go do this. You could do that. No, you go see the doctor. You get a splint. You get it straightened. That stuff. And when he explained it that way, all of a sudden I realized that it's not about positive mental attitude. It's not about this or that. It's really about getting that help. And one of the things that I appreciate what you do is you're trying to break the stigma. And quite frankly, that's what a lot of people have said, is that there's that stigma to mental health that we that, especially those that might not have had it before, just don't quite get. And so I'm asking you is, what should I do? Here I come, and I'm approaching a friend that may or may not have a disorder, but I want to help. I know Gary has said just show up, but what do you do to get past that? This is really freaking awkward right now, man.
Yeah. And do you know, I think one of the things is actually it's okay to say, I don't know what to say, or I don't know how to support you. I just want you to know that, you know, I wish I could do more, but maybe you could tell me. The other thing I think is really useful, and I always say this to people, if they're, you know, looking at like a new mum has, you know, just had their baby, what do you do? Instead of saying, e.g., how are you? Or what can I do to help? So those two questions, when you're not in a great space, you don't know how to answer. If someone says, how can I help you? You're like, I don't even know. Whereas if you say, hey, I was thinking that either I could take your dog for a walk, or do you want me to go to the supermarket to pick up your milk or something? You know, there's some options for someone to go, actually, walking my dog would really help me out. You know, it's there's less to think about, you know?
Oh my, yes. So it's not a close-ended question, basically.
Yeah. Because if someone says to you, how, you know, what can I do to help? You naturally will go, nothing, thanks, I'm fine. And then you go, okay, great. Whereas if you've thought about, you know, or even just turning up and going, hey, I've just turned up, I'm going to take your dog for a walk, you know, and it's like, oh, it feels so caring. Or maybe some people actually might go, you know, get off my property.
Well, I think you could kind of take it off the analogy that you were talking about, Maurice, with like a broken arm. Like if somebody had a broken arm, you can kind of guess what they can and can't do. And I think if you extrapolate that a little bit and say, you know, their mind is completely overwhelmed and shut down in this moment. What can you do to help alleviate any, you know what I mean? Like let that thought process heal, I think, is a way to look at it. And another thing too, going off what you were saying before, Maurice, which I think is kind of interesting, is I think we're getting better on mental health. But I remember back in the day, going through some of the depression challenges that I went through, my dad was a doctor and he didn't get it. He did not understand. He was basically kind of the approach that you took. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so we're getting better and we're getting there. And I think, you know, that's why the stuff that you're doing, Hannah, is so important and is so exciting. And can you explain a little bit about what you guys are doing? Like how, what angle are you guys coming from?
Yeah, so in terms of the business with Kite, it started off as I guess a product, an app program for mothers, because that's where I'd been. And it came from the idea that things were so overwhelming and you don't have time to sit and read a book or a webinar, or, you know, you've got this limited amount of time. And so my idea was, if I could write a beautiful note to a mum, all mums, and all I had to do was put it in their letterbox, and they just would go and pick it up from the letterbox every morning, and they'd have this really practical, beautiful, you know, ideas to implement in their life to help them. And it was things like, you know, going back to work and feeling guilty, or feeling disconnected with your partner. So this idea of this beautiful note, which obviously, as I was planning out this idea, that's not an easy thing to do, to write every mother a note. So I created the app and the Kite program as that idea that if we could make the app beautiful, you make it so that people can only do that one little thing each day, and once they've ticked it, they know that there'll be another one tomorrow. And it's just a beautiful journey where they feel like they're getting validation, but also just practical things to do that will help them. And that's come from other mums. And so that was the first product that we launched, and it was beautiful and wonderful, but it's a consumer product, and trying to get this to mums individually was really, really difficult. So, which is why we've pivoted somewhat to be a business solution. So we have that same concept where businesses can create a version for their people, not just mums, anyone. And we've got some industry type products like for lawyers, and we're doing one for HR professionals. So it's this idea that it's still the note idea, but it's the idea that if you can create something that's actually validating for someone and that they can see themselves reflected. And I think a lot of what's out there at the moment in terms of well-being and mental health technology is wonderful, but it's just very generic. You just give that to someone and go, hopefully this works for you. Whereas we're sort of saying, if we can come at it from the user perspective and build everything back up from that design, content, everything, then that journey that they go on, it feels so much more meaningful. So that's pretty much kind of where we're at. Yeah.
That's what I love, is that you customize it for each individual instead of here's a blanket. This is going to work for everybody. It is very customizable, and the snippet learning aspect of it, I absolutely adore. Because we tend to get into too much overload, info overload, right?
Totally.
And amazing. Now, and you did bring up some other things as you take it to business. You have the HR kite.
Right? Yes, which we're just about to launch, which funnily enough, I partnered with a really amazing woman in Boston, and she's her name's Dr. Alessandra Polisi, and she said to me, have you thought about doing something for HR professionals? And it just, I feel like we've been doing all these other amazing things, and that just seemed like such an easy fit. So that will be launching in January. And again, it's just so that that HR person opens up this app and they just feel connected to it. These topics are things that they're going through right now. We've even got a mindfulness lady that's actually created HR specific mindfulness to do between like difficult meetings, and it's so specific, which is
I could see that. You look at like HR, or whether you're an attorney or a physician, so many of these things where there's a lot of people demanding your time and attention, and it's daily fires over and over and over again. Like I think it's awesome that there's finally something out there that people can look, at first someone outside may say like HR, they're the toughest people in the world. They can be, they're fine, but like, man, it's like, I look at it, that's a position that's probably like death by 1,000 cuts if you're not careful.
Yep. Matter of fact, there was a joke that went around on Wall Street when I was there, and they said, you can't spell who cares without HR. But being that, and I'm going to go to this because you did bring up some important statistics too. 57% of mental illness is in the workplace. 55% are dealing with difficult leaders. 50% compassion fatigue. I've never heard about compassion fatigue, but it makes a whole heck of a lot of sense, right?
Yeah.
And then there's 50% of HR specific mindfulness issues. And I would even tend to think that it might even be higher right now since the time that you did these studies. But wow. Well, again, compassion fatigue. I would have never even thought of anything like that.
Yeah, and it's amazing because obviously that's something that normally affects obviously physicians and veterinarians, and but from an HR perspective, I think the biggest sort of side effect from it is this desensitized sort of feeling, like you become numb to just how much is going on around you. If you've fired your 100th person that month, like that starts becoming like that is that burnout, but it's also just that complete lack of it's a really difficult thing, and it's something that is very hard to come out from. I think particularly if you look at physicians, like it can completely derail them in terms of their why they're even doing this, and and almost derail it to the point that you actually change careers because you've got to that point, which is a worry.
Gary, you experienced some of that kind of stuff too, right?
Oh, I'm right in the middle of it right now, to be honest with you. It's I was just talking with a coworker about this week is, I got into mid-level, kind of the administrative side of healthcare because I enjoyed building teams. I enjoyed fixing processes. I enjoyed, having people pull in the same direction, that type of stuff. But then, I didn't sign up for 22 months of crisis management. You know what I mean? Like it just drains you after a while. And the other stuff doesn't stop. You know what I mean? You still have to do everything else on top of, working clinically, day in, day out, covering shift as staff leaves, as staff gets sick, oh no, it's very real and poignant right now. You're seeing a lot on, the nursing side, physician side, but it's not just that too. It's like you said, it's HR, it's every aspect, aspect. Yeah. So I kind of jump forward a little bit, but I want to go back. How did you, so when we left off with you personally, you're trying to get over your mental health struggles.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, boom, you're like starting this app. Something happened in between there.
Well, there was 4 years in between that, so we did have a gap. So I mean, it took me probably a year to really kind of get back to who I felt like I was, So it was very traumatic that first year, and we moved from Auckland to Christchurch to kind of start a new life, really, that didn't have those memories. And I went back to I worked for a big hospital here in HR, and I went back to that sort of role. And it got to the point where I ended up having another baby, which was amazing. And it was it was not even something that I would have considered, when I first had Alice. But it was just with the help of the mental health team here, and that staying on medication was a big thing. So they supported staying on medication throughout the whole pregnancy, and I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have done it if I couldn't have stayed on my meds. And I got back to, after Henry was 1, I went back to work. And weirdly enough, I felt like I was like, this was what I was going to do for the rest of my life. I wanted to be the GM of HR for Air New Zealand. It was like on my vision board. And I met a woman just randomly at a networking event, and she was a life coach, which I'd never, gone to a life coach. And she started asking me all these questions about, wow, you sound like you really love your career. And, let me ask you these questions because I'm fascinated, because I'm trying to help people get to that point. So she asked me all these questions and I answered them, and I got home and it was like these questions had just bored into my brain. And it was like, I don't want to do this. What am I doing? And I actually had to ring her a week later and said, you've changed my life. I don't want to do HR. And she was like, what? But sometimes I think it just takes that, like, just somebody to just ask a few, different questions.
Do you remember what she asked? Do you remember what
she just asked me? Oh, it was around, just what was the reason you went into HR in the first place? How do you feel when you get home? Are you energized? It was just a very kind of, just little questions. And I said to my husband, I don't want to do HR anymore. And he said, what is, and I told him about this meeting with this woman. He's like, who is she? What has she done to you?
I got her.
and interestingly enough, one of the things I always say about my bipolar diagnosis is, before I was unwell, I was the implementer. I just like to follow instructions and do tasks, but I wasn't the creative person. I wasn't the leader. And after this conversation with this woman, in my mind, my business just, it was almost like for sort of 2 weeks, I'd just chip away and write things. And I realized that my brain worked differently now. And I had all these ideas, and I felt brave, and I felt like I could do this as a global business. All these words, I would never have used the word global in anything that I did. So that was the start. It was like just igniting a little flame, really.
Right. Oh,
well, it's interesting that you chose initially, of all things, mental health. I mean,
Yes.
that's I mean, I know a lot of people that they would have ran as far away as they possibly could from the thing that made them feel the worst.
Yeah.
That was something you just honed in on, it sounds like.
Yeah, and I
Why?
definitely, because it was for mothers to start with, so I felt so connected, and I had met so many mums that had not just, it's not just mental health issues, but just struggled. And I thought, I really felt like I could do something to try and look after them. Funnily enough, I think for the first year of starting Kite, I didn't ever want to use the word clinical, and I didn't really want to use the word mental health. I kept sort of saying it's well-being. And after sort of that period of time, I really sort of looked at it and thought, and I think it was probably because of what you're saying, a little bit of being scared of it. Like that's a bit scary. I don't know if I can, and I made the decision to start talking about my experience, and I wrote a blog, and it got so much sort of media attention here, and it just became really, really natural for me to just be so open about it and not shy away from, talking about hard things. And then it did take quite a lot of time for me to start talking about mental health on LinkedIn, because it was almost like I felt like on my Instagram or, in the paper or TV, that's different. But LinkedIn seemed like I shouldn't talk about it there. This is a business platform. People won't respond. And then one day I thought, well, actually, that is the perfect platform for it, because I think that's
why we're here.
To get to. Yeah, exactly. Look at that.
It really did. Like I said, it struck me with a great deal of force, especially in light of what we've been hearing there. And with that, you had also mentioned at one time that you said, I thought you were hard on yourself, but you said, I'm sorry for the person I was before I had a mental illness. I'm sorry for judging people who struggled.
Yeah.
And I look at that, and I didn't get it. And I love the fact that you gave up a career. Let's face it, you were on the fast track. Right?
Yeah.
You were on the fast track of this, but you chose to make a difference, right? And what are some of those things that you have seen from not only your work with the app, but also just in general, working with people? What are some of the really neat things that you've seen along the way?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just people feeling heard. Like I remember someone saying to me, and it's obviously not related, but with the Black Lives Matter movement, and there was a little girl talking about how she'd never seen anyone with her skin color in a book before, so all the children's books, all she saw was just white children. And that really struck me in terms of what I want to be able to give to people, is that when they first, log into their own Kite experience, that they actually see themselves, whether it's their culture, whether it's their illness, whether it's their language, like it's a connection to it. And so I think seeing along the way, when we've shared, the different products that we've had, seeing people's reactions to it, and seeing that they actually feel emotionally connected. And I think from a technology perspective, apps aren't designed to necessarily make you have an emotional connection. They're designed to get you to log more, share more, use more, like it's a big difference. So I've really loved seeing that sort of that journey. And from a personal perspective, I think every time I talk about my story, I'm not doing it because I want lots of people to like and share it, but having people reach out to say, you've made a difference to my life, or I don't feel as alone, or, you've made it seem more normal or more acceptable. And, I would really need to collect them all up and put them into a beautiful book just to refer to, if I ever worry about my why, and, or feel like, this is actually really hard, I could just pick up this beautiful, collection of thoughts and things. So those things have been amazing, and things are changing. I truly believe that they are. I think people are getting more confident talking about it, and leaders are getting more confident being vulnerable. I think that's a massive thing that I've noticed.
There's that word again, Gary, vulnerability.
I was just going to say that. Yeah.
I'm sorry for stealing your thunder. We interviewed a woman named Barbie the welder a bit ago, and she is one of the best metal sculptors in the world. Amazing. And it wasn't until she allowed herself to be vulnerable that and it was that vulnerability. Good grief. Well,
and what's interesting too is like you were saying, first you thought that LinkedIn would probably be the worst platform for getting your word out. But one thing that we see is we interview these, high level, high operating, highly successful people. Is I'd say more often than not, there's an underlying history of some sort of mental struggle, mental addiction. You know what I mean? It's becoming more of the norm. So I think in the past, it was almost career suicide to bring that type of stuff up.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Whereas now people are, it is becoming more normalized, which I think is fantastic, because you can't heal it if you can't talk about it.
Yeah. And what I also love the fact that you're creating multipliers, for lack of a better word, as that people use this, they see how it impacts them, and they're willing to share how it helped them. And it's in a way creating a movement of mental health in a very non-traditional fashion, which quite frankly is something we need, because that's how we break the stigma. At least that's my assumption.
Yeah.
Well, and I think there's also room for, when we say mental health, like when I go to my primary care physician or whatever for a checkup, I'm not sick, but it's so I don't get sick down the road. And I think a lot of what's happening now is it helps all people. It helps people, even say someone like you, Maurice, that hasn't really struggled with it, but just being able to understand it and be aware is a win for everyone. You know what I mean? And it helps people also recognize signs early before they live it for a year straight or 2 years straight,
Yeah, absolutely.
So a quick question. You said you had a post on LinkedIn that had like 2 million views or shares. What was that?
So that was the I'm sorry post that Maurice was mentioning. So it was, weirdly enough, I'd actually done a lot of posts around, just talking about mental health, and, not huge traction with them, but I always felt like, it's got to a few people, that's good. And I'm part of a network called the Stability Network, and it's about leaders who share around the world their mental health experiences to reduce stigma. And as part of that, there was a training session on how you do public speaking on your journey. And the guy, his name's Bill, he's a TEDx sort of speaker trainer. And he said to me, how do you normally share your story? And I said, well, I talk about, I had my baby and then I got sick. And he was like, what about starting it with who you were before? And it was like, I just hadn't even thought about that person, because I just was so, when a traumatic event happens, it's kind of like the point that happens. Yeah. And he said to me, think about you sitting at your desk in your HR role and someone maybe, saying that they're struggling with depression. What did you think? And I was like, it just hit me in terms of that person. I was like, well, I know that I would have felt irritated and, starting to think of, well, what roles are we going to put? It's this really unempathetic person. And so I decided just to write, I'm sorry, on a piece of paper and say, I'm sorry for the person that I was before my mental illness, and all the things that I thought at that time. I thought people only had mental health issues when they were on the fringes of society, whatever that was. And, it was just a list. And I posted it. It kind of felt very vulnerable. It was like, I feel like this is not what I normally do. And even within like 3 hours, it had like 25,000 views, and I started getting I ended up getting 2,500 connection requests. It was just completely mental. So that was the post. Yeah. But I also there was a huge amount of people that were, I mean, huge, but there were a number of people who really didn't take kindly to the post either, you know. So these trolls that actually have their role, it's always amazing to me on LinkedIn, because you can see who they are and where they work and what their job is. I'm like, you're not doing a very good job of trolling. Like,
yeah. So if you had to summarize, why did that hit such a nerve? Why was that so big?
Yeah, I think when people talk about mental health, and I do this, you know, you talk about your experience, people go, oh, that's interesting, but it doesn't make them reflect on themselves, because they're just like, that person's been unwell and, oh, wow, they're being a really brave person. But as soon as I think doing that and saying, these are all the things that I thought, I think people just looked at that list and thought, that's kind of maybe how I felt. Yeah, that's me right now. Or it just took it, I think it was just a lot more relatable than me saying, you know, I've struggled with my mental health. I think that makes people feel quite disconnected sometimes.
That's what I think is so cool about it. And that's exactly how I felt, is because as soon as you can say, well, someone says, okay, I have depression, is you can put them in a nice little box and set them over on the shelf and say, I hope you get better. But what your post did was say, everyone. Yeah. Oh, that's me. That could be me. Or, you know what I mean? And so I think it's odd. I think that was amazing advice that you got. And I need to think about that one for a while.
Well, yeah, definitely. It really opened something up. And he didn't know, because Bill's actually not really on LinkedIn. So I messaged him and said, this has happened. And he was just like, you know, wow, that's pretty amazing. But I think anybody, whether from a public speaking perspective, whether it's a mental health issue you're talking about or anything, I think it's just a really good place to start, you know. And he said to me, if you're talking, paint the picture, like, what did that room look like? What, you know, maybe you're wearing a red sweater, like, give people a sense of like where you were and what you were thinking. And it's a great place to start. So, yeah.
No, I have to thank you, because this is a very enlightening discussion for me. Again, I've known a lot of people that have gone through this, and remember when we were, Gary, when we were buddies back in the time when you were going through some of these things, it was always, the answer was from Gary was, no, it's all good, man. Always. It's all good. And I knew it wasn't, but I had no idea how to approach it, because you just go with what you know, and the knowledge that you're sharing in on these platforms, and just again through your sharing to me it alters my mindset even more, to make sure that I'm very aware. I mean, there's those in my family that are going through some of these things too, as you folks talk about. It's a different approach, and I can't thank you both enough, Gary. I mean, Gary, you were vulnerable on this one too, even though he won't say vulnerable, but it's Hannah's fault. I want to put it on Hannah.
Oh, no, I'm totally fine, but I actually love talking about this type of stuff, you know, now, because, you know, we have just come so far as a society, you know what I mean? There's a lot more room to go. I don't know how healthcare from a medical side, you know, or government or whatever is handled in New Zealand. And unfortunately, in the US, I almost call it a revolving door, where people come in and out of the system over and over and over again. So, I mean, there's definitely so much room for improvement, but at the same time, people like you know, are having such a huge impact. And I think it's fantastic that you were willing to take something that was traumatic and a struggle in your life and really leverage it into, you know, again, it's also bigger than just postpartum depression at this point, or you're going into all sorts of arenas. And that, to me, that's just as vital, whether you're an HR person struggling or an attorney or whatever. Still very real.
Absolutely. I always have a thing, someone said, you know, what sort of things can Kite do? And I was like, well, we could even create something for like female astronauts, or you know, like completely obscure things, because almost like, why not just create things for really, you know, women in mining, or, you know,
You hold on to that thought, because there's some people that I want to introduce you to.
Well, literally, it's like publishing a book. If you can think of an interesting, amazing topic, then we can do it.
Oh
Yeah.
my goodness.
Well, I was going to say, it seems to me like right now you were saying about caregiver fatigue and compassion fatigue is, I just see that as a huge need right now. Is people in those environments are just tired and they're worn out, and I always say like, things that would normally be no problem to handle, but when you have no bandwidth or no reserve to deal with them, you just burn out,
So
absolutely.
This has been one of those thought-provoking conversations that I can't thank you enough. I know I already said that, but I really can't thank you enough, because this has opened my eyes in a way that I wasn't intending to be opened in this way. Open-minded, of sure, but just the things that you shed light on, but also just the availability of what you're doing to be able to continue to help others, huge. And can't thank you.
We need to do this again. We got more to talk about.
We certainly do. We certainly do. And I hope you'll consider that. Now, I know we're going to sign off in a minute here, but please stay on, because there's something I want to talk about, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.